Good morning, everyone. I would like to invite you to move into the sanctuary and listen to the music as we bring ourselves together for today's service.
Welcome. As we begin, please turn off electronic devices. I invite you to enjoy the chapel in the back of the sanctuary and note joys and concerns in the book there. If you have little ones, we have a nursery downstairs, and after our service, I invite you downstairs for our potluck and to greet one another. It's a wonderful time once a month we get together for our potluck and get to spend a little bit more time getting to know each other. So finally, please note the announcements in your order of service with many ways to be engaged in our vibrant community.
Good morning. I'm Laura Quigley, and I serve as a member of the Board of Trustees, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning. So I will read our traditional reading. Come, come, whoever you are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter who you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You are welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears. You are welcome here. If you come with an open heart, an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, you are welcome here.
Good morning again. It's really good to be here with all of you today. Maybe you're like me and this has not been the best week. Or maybe it wasn't even the best January. For some of us, it has not been the best past year. But I do feel that we are so very fortunate to be able to come together like this each Sunday and to receive some restoration in community. Community is so important. Today is our first service in Black History Month, and we are so pleased to be joined by Dr. Ronald Coleman, an incredible historian. Dr. Coleman, excuse me, is originally from San Francisco, but he has been in Utah for about 45 years, I think he told me, which, you know, that means, hey, you've decided you like us enough to hang out, so we appreciate that. He has 3 children, and he was a professor at the university. He retired a couple of years ago, but I think you're really going to like what he has to talk to us about today. So in the interest of allowing as much time as possible, I just want to open with a well-known, well-worn quote. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand, but with the intent to reply. The first step, I think, of we who hope to ally ourselves with other communities is to understand, to let go of our ego and the knee-jerk response we often have to defend ourselves and our community. So I do invite you today to join me in listening. And I also invite you to stand in either body or spirit, and we are going to sing hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Will the young and young at heart please join me up front? talking about, well, Dr. Coleman's going to talk to us about Black history in Utah. Does everyone know why we celebrate Black History Month? Can anyone gather a guess? It's because a lot of our history in this country and in our society does not include the achievements of our African Americans throughout history. And so that robs us all of knowing our full history. And some of you have maybe seen a movie that came out recently called Hidden Figures. Who's seen the movie? All right. So Hidden Figures is about 4 women who are computers. Now what do you guys think of when you think of a computer? Electronic. Yeah. Yeah. So right now we think of these and laptops and desktops, but they used to be people who were really good at math and solving problems. So this is the story of 4 women who were computers. It is the story of Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden. So these women lived in a time when both women and African Americans they weren't allowed to do a lot of things in society. So they were kept separate from whites in schools and employments. They were often not allowed to have certain jobs. So these women were trailblazers. So Dorothy saw that there was a job at NACA, which was the organization before NASA. And at the time, there weren't women and there weren't African American women who were applying to be engineers and computers. But she knew that she was the right person for the job. So she applied and she got in. And at the time, she had to work in a different area than her white colleagues. And she had to take breaks and have lunch and go to the bathroom in different areas. And she helped, she joined during World War II, and she helped test for airplanes and to make it faster and safer. And when the war was ended, she stayed on and she kept working. And Mary Jackson got a job at NACA, and she studied airplanes and wind tunnels to make them safer. An important thing that she did was she wanted to be an engineer. And women weren't allowed to be engineers. And she was black, so she couldn't go to the school to study the classes that she needed to become an engineer. But she knew that she wanted to become an engineer. So she got special permission to go to those classes, and she became the first African American female engineer at that laboratory. And she was really good at math, and she helped study turbulence. Has anyone been on a plane when we had turbulence? Yeah, that's kind of scary, huh? So a lot of people's lives have probably been saved by the work that she did. And she was also not allowed to be on certain committees, which were very important because they were the ones that published reports. But she knew that she needed a place there. So she persisted and asked her boss over and over and over again to be on those committees. And she became the first woman in her group to sign her name on one of the group's reports. And another interesting thing about Dorothy is that when the first computer, so this is like an old computer, they used to be the size of a room. When those were first invented, they weren't good at math. So she helped develop a program to help make sure their math was correct, and she taught it to her colleagues. So Catherine Johnson, she was really good at math, and she was really good at computing the trajectory of spacecrafts. So when John Glenn was going to orbit the Earth for the first time, he asked her to double check the math that the machine computers had done. And when she said the math was good, then he felt safe and he orbited the Earth. And this was all happening during the Civil Rights Movement. So there was a lot going on during that time, and these women were a part of that. So Christine Darden, she joined NACA, which later became NASA, a little bit later, and she joined right before they tried to land a man on the moon. So she was very important because she did the mathematics that helped put the men on the moon. So that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin could land on the moon. So these women stayed on NASA and helped do a lot of calculations and computing. And their next adventures wouldn't be easy and required lots of tests and lots more numbers. But Dorothy, Mary, Catherine, and Christine knew one thing. With hard work, perseverance, and a love of math, anything was possible. If you would all join me in singing Our Children Downstairs.
As we prepare for our offering and main portion of our service, let's take a moment to recenter ourselves. If you're comfortable with it, please close your eyes. Sit up against your chair and breathe. Feel the chair beneath you, supporting you. Feel it connected to the floor, to the foundation of this building, to the ground. Breathe. Feel your heartbeat. Feel your lungs moving in and out. Feel the ground connecting you to every member of this congregation. Feel this space safe and full of strength, power, and healing. Breathe. Now that we are grounded together, expand your awareness outward. See the individuals of this town, this state, this nation, this world, our family, our friends, those we both agree with and those with whom we have troubles. Feel how the ground, the earth, our collective desire to feel happiness and avoid suffering connects us all. Expand the power, strength, and healing we have created here to encompass those who need it and to bring them into our community. Breathe. When I ring the bell, please speak the names of those who need our help, our healing, our power into this space. Say them out loud. Say them in silence. Say them into your heart. Just say them. Now, when I ring the bell again, allow yourself to come back to awareness, to the here and now, to our community.
In the spirit of serving our wider community, it is our practice to share our worship service offering with a charitable organization whose works align with our values and principles. January and February, we will donate half of our offerings to the Healthy Environment Alliance of Utah, HEAL Utah. Harnessing the power of grassroots advocacy and smart policy research, HEAL engages in legislative and regulatory settings to champion clean air and clean energy, and protect Utah from nuclear, toxic, and dirty energy threats. Will you join me in saying the words printed in your order of service for our offering? We are this church. We are its hands, its heart, its voice. Together we share the wealth of this community and sustain it with our gifts. The HEAL organization thanks you for your gifts. I would like to invite Dr. Ronald Coleman to share with us about Black history in Utah.
Good morning. I've been here once before, I believe. You all supported the Albert Henry Education Foundation. Some work that we were doing with them. But Black History Month. And a facet of Utah history. The creator of the song that we first sang this morning, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was a man by the name of James Weldon Johnson. His brother, Coleman, who worked with him, was James Rosamond Johnson. What is sometimes overlooked is the fact that they wrote the song, but they were very talented musicians. And James Weldon Johnson was the first executive director of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is often overlooked. I am surprised, or maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, at the invitation of Pastor Willis to extend it to me to come here. It was some time ago, and then I simply forgot about it. And February, all of a sudden it's on us, and I said, wow, I made that commitment. And got that honor. And it's really a surprise in that most congregations, given the racial and ethnic makeup of this congregation, they don't even acknowledge, let alone celebrate, the history of a segment of the American population, which is often overlooked. The father of Black History Month was a man by the name of Carter G. Woodson. He was a historian and one of the first Black Americans to earn a PhD in history. And when he formally launched Negro History Week, which was the second week in February, because it commemorated and celebrated the birthday of two Americans who had been actively involved in changing the position of African Americans within the United States. One was a great abolitionist, anti-slavery freedom fighter by the name of Frederick Douglass. Some of you may be familiar with Mr. Douglass. His narrative, his life story, open to the broad American population and understanding about the cruelties of slavery. And the second person, perhaps even more importantly, was the 16th President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. And, you know, Mr. Lincoln belonged to George Washington. When I was young, very young, I always thought there were two presidents, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Didn't know much about the others in between. And a number of years ago, when I was in Illinois, a friend of mine, we went to Springfield. You can't go to Springfield and over not get in contact with Mr. Lincoln. And I went to visit his resting place. It was a very powerful moment. truly a great American hero. I'm zipping my lip on what I'm thinking about saying, and I compliment you to one of his successors. African Americans, and what I'm talking about is not really just Black history or history of blacks. I'm talking about Utah history. It's an aspect of Utah history which, like in the general situation of American history, is often overlooked. And many people blow off the history of African Americans in Utah because historically, and even today, they comprise a very small segment of the total population. And I've had friends outside of Utah all ask me over the years, haven't heard it recently, man, how is it up there with the Mormons? How can you live up there? Same way you live here in San Francisco or anywhere else. But African Americans have resided in Utah since the arrival of the Brigham Young-led Vanguard Party in 1847. And during the Pioneer Era, which is 1847-69, completion of the railroad, Black residents here were because of two reasons. One, they were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or they were slaves of Southern converts to the Mormon faith and had journeyed west with their owners during the Pioneer Era. And the 1850 census listed a total of 50 Black residents in Utah. 26 were listed as slaves, and the other 24 were listed as free men and women. And although some were listed as being free, they still were prohibited from voting, serving on juries, or being elected to political office. And according to Utah law, slavery was legal from 1852 until 1862, when the United States Congress abolished slavery in the territories. And although political disabilities were removed following the Civil War, it did not necessarily lead to any sense of equality within the Utah territory. In 1888, the Utah legislature passed an anti-miscegenation law, which prohibited the issuance of a marriage license between a white person, a Negro, or Mongolian. The law remained valid until 1965. And you could be married outside of the state of Utah and come here, but you could not be married within Utah. And that was resolved when the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Loving versus the state of Virginia. Some of you may have seen the film recently. When the first African American was selected to serve on a jury in 1890, his service was opposed by the 11 white jurors. They met, formulated a petition in which they stated, and I'm quoting, "As American citizens, we object to serving on a jury with a colored man." They refused to have breakfast with McPherson and refused to ride on the elevator with him. McPherson responded saying, "There is no law against my serving on the jury, yet in this state where they particularly preach the gospel of Christ and the equality of man, I have been cast out." the actions of the white jurors, and McPherson's response demonstrate 2 points. First, white Utahns, when asked to recognize the rights of blacks as citizens, refused to do so. They felt they had the right to refuse because of their inherent rights as American citizens. Clearly, this was a logical progression born of many years of the belief in white superiority and black inferiority. Second, and from a varying perspective, McPherson's response demonstrates that by 1900, the dawning of the 20th century, in Utah, African Americans were aware of their civil rights and possessed the means and will to assert it. Here clearly was a confrontation between white racism and black civil rights in Utah as early as 1900. In the early decades of the 20th century, the color line became more rigid in Utah as black residents found themselves excluded from participating in the general social and cultural life of the state, particularly in the Ogden area and Salt Lake City. Now, they simply didn't turn their backs and walk away and stick their tails between their legs. They responded in ways similar to African Americans in other parts of the country. They created their own churches, fraternal organizations, literary clubs, and newspapers. An example would be Ogden's Emory Chapel, Salt Lake City's Trinity African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Calvary Baptist Church. Newspapers such as the Broad Axe and the Utah Plain Dealer obtained information from other African American communities and told other African Americans what was going on within the state of Utah. The overt forms of discrimination ranged from lynchings in 1883 and 1925 to the 1979 shooting of 2 black joggers in Salt Lake City's Liberty Park. Less extreme forms of discrimination, but equally disheartening, was experienced with frequent rejections in housing, employment, and public accommodations. In 1939, Sheldon Brewster, a Salt Lake realtor and LDS bishop, gathered 1,000 signatures on a petition that would have relocated black residents from their homes near the city and county building to a less visible location. Brewster went as far as to hire a local black resident in an attempt to persuade other black homeowners to sell their property. African American and others protested at the state capitol, and the petition failed. In addition to being barred from using municipal and private swimming pool, goon, goon, goon. You all know goon, goon, goon? Let's all go to the goon. I'm past that point. My children are thankful are past that point as well. Lagoon was segregated and closed to black Utahns until after World War II. In addition, in the areas of public accommodations, such as hotels, restaurants, and other social organizations, African Americans had to suffer the indignity of being refused admittance or service. It was in 1938 that the Hotel Utah, Joseph Smith Memorial Building, but Hotel Utah is what many of us knew it as. The Hotel Utah agreed to provide a room for the Metropolitan Opera contralto Marian Anderson, only after she agreed to ride up in the freight elevator. Upon her return in 1948 and in 1951, conditions had somewhat changed. If you were a celebrity, and the Hotel Utah was delighted to have this internationally recognized singer stay there during her Salt Lake City visit. Similar discriminatory experience occurred with other African American celebrities, such as the jazz singer Ella Fitzgerald visited Utah. As late as 1955, Utah's African American residents continued to be restricted to balcony seats in many of the local theaters. Certain jobs were unavailable, as well as access to most nightclubs. Some hospitals restricted black patients to private rooms and separated the plasma of blacks and whites in their blood banks. Although Utah schools were not legally segregated at any level, kindergarten through high school, colleges, or universities, the overall perceptions and intertwining race and religion permeated the school environment. I believe that the experience of many African Americans who grew up in Utah led them to relocate to other locales outside of Utah, where they felt they would have more opportunities to fulfill their potential. One example is Ms. Tony Hart. That's a name that you all would be familiar with. Her maiden name was Tony Nathaniel, and she was a student, attended graduate of South High School, later relocated to Chicago, where she went to school, and then she and her husband and family made their home in New Haven, Connecticut, where she is the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut. That was a brain drain of black Utahns seeking better opportunities outside of the state. And the racism of white Utahns and the subordinate status of African Americans was shaped by general perceptions of white Utahns about blacks in American society. In addition, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints pre-1978 policy, which prohibited persons of African descent from holding the priesthood, provided a theological rationale for their racism. Church authorities frequently contended that their religious beliefs had no impact on secular practices. Certainly that wasn't the case. I don't believe then or now. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, has existed in Salt Lake City and Ogden since 1919 and 1943, respectively. The Salt Lake branch was established 10 years after the national organization, and in 1943 was the year that the branch was established in Ogden. One of the things that may surprise one, since we often, when we think of leadership in this country, we are gender-based in our narrow framework of thinking of men only. And in the case of the civil rights of organizations such as the NAACP in Salt Lake City, there has always been a strong leadership coming from the women. Women such as Mrs. Ruby Price, Mrs. Alberta Henry, and Mrs. Janetta Williams, all of whom have served as the heads of those respective civil rights organizations. The racial discrimination of the day led some individuals to actively challenge the status quo. And one was a man by the name of Robert Freed. Robert Freed, and along with his family and his partner, took over the lease at Lagoon. And the terms which had previously prohibited African Americans from using the swimming pool or ballroom in accordance with the Farmington Town ordinances, by the end of the 1940s, because of Robert Freed and his associates, all of the facilities at Lagoon was open to African Americans and other minority populations. A similar policy was adopted when the Freed family acquired the Rainbow Gardens, or later known as the Terrace. And most of you young people may don't remember the Terrace or Rainbow Gardens, but your parents and your grandparents did. In 1964, Utah, Arizona, and Nevada were the only states outside of the South that did not positively prohibit discrimination in employment or public accommodations. I came to Utah in 1963. I was 18 years old. Wow. It's been a while. And I came here because of two persons aside from myself. Thomas Coleman and Chuck Chatfield. Thomas Coleman obviously was my dad. And he made the decision that it was time for me to leave. And I didn't want to come, but he told me he and my mom were giving me a going away party. I was done in the spring. And Chuck Chatfield was a football coach at the University of Utah. And he made a commitment to my parents that he would help their boy grow up to be a man. I really was mad that my father said that to him. I thought I was a man then. I was 18. And so I came to Utah. And I spent 2.5 years at the University of Utah. I got what I came for, which was a college degree. And I left never to return. So much for never to return. And I was gone for 8 years. And I came back because of an unusual opportunity that came my way because of a former professor that I'd been a student of. And that temporary state, which should have ended some time ago, has turned into 45 plus years. And so now, in my life journey, I'm at a point where you start thinking about the reality of your own time coming to a close. And my wife has said, "Do you want me to take you back to San Francisco where your family is?" I said, "No, ground is too expensive." So throw me out wherever you think you're going to end up. And we'll be done with it. In coming here in 1963, I met a man by the name of Dr. Charles Neighbors. Chuck Neighbors was the only African American on the faculty and in the School of Medicine. And, you know, I didn't live here. Civil rights wasn't a concern of mine in Utah. I did not live there. I lived on campus. Didn't really have to deal with any of the problems. And Dr. Neighbors called us out. And us, by that, I mean my fellow teammates and other African American athletes, saying that we needed to get more involved. And I had a teammate, his name was Mike Davis, Bummer. Bummer went to a local restaurant one time to get a custard pie, and they wouldn't serve it. They refused to serve it. And so in that type of environment, Dr. Neighbors shamed us into participating in civil rights protests here, which did not take place. Some of it took place up in front, on Capitol Hill in front of the state legislature. But everybody knows that the real power, political power in the state was down on South Temple at the time. And so we joined in with others in protesting the lack of civil rights down in front of the church headquarters building. And Dr. Chuck Neighbors was just a very, very important person along with a few others that made the adjustment here. So we have a story of a civil rights struggle and efforts to make this place a better place. I mentioned earlier that the church this position, they denied that it, religious perceptions and this priesthood issue didn't have anything to do with non-church religion. But clearly, even Ray Charles could see that it did. Just didn't make sense. Because if your religion guides you to live a better, more moral, more ethical life, how are you going to say that you have something within that that questions the position of the people who don't look like you, that it's not going to have any effect on non-religious life? Didn't make sense. And in 1974, there was a matter involving a Boy Scout incident in which African Americans, if you didn't hold a certain position in LDS-sponsored church troops, then you couldn't aspire to leadership. I thought an agreement was worked out between the NAACP and Latter-day Saint Church, which I thought the NAACP caved in. If they ever had a chance, that was the deal. They could clearly demonstrate that the priesthood religious issue impacted non-religious status of blacks. But I don't know, I wasn't privy to any of the deals that were reached out. In 1978, things changed. And I'd say in the last 45 years, this has become a much better place to live. Certainly, through at least the lens from which I view the world. Or else I wouldn't be here. I can't go back to San Francisco because I can't afford to live in San Francisco. But this is a very good place to live, quality of life. Still got a lot of work to do. And you even see the presence of African Americans within the political landscape. 6 African Americans have served in the Utah State Legislature since 1976, and 1 in the United States House of Representatives. And we have 2, 1 in the state legislature, Ms. Sandra Hollins, and 1 in Congress, Ms. Mia Love. And clearly, if you just look in politics, you can see that Black Americans aren't all on the same page. I'm playing with this idea in my own work about the relevance. I've got something in my mouth which I'm trying to get my tooth fixed. You can see I'm on, but I've got a flipper. This thing, I hate it. I'm looking at the importance of athletics at both the university and professional levels as having a major positive influence on improving racial relationships. Playing with the idea of recruitment and at college levels and the professional levels is bringing to the white community some familiarity and access to African Americans that didn't previously exist. That's just something I'm playing around in my own head with. As long as they don't get into trouble. And even you can see this taking place not just in Logan or Weaver or Ogden or Salt Lake, but even down in Provo. And then also, I'm thinking that we still have a lack of visibility of diverse populations in all facets of Utah life. And that lack of visibility leads to a lack of familiarity and interactions that leads to the marginalization, I think, of people of color in this community. These are all things of an older person who's still basically, I think, fundamentally sound, but part of my own musings. That's what it is, my musings. Thank you.
We're now going to sing the hymn at the, I forgot the title of it, but I know the words. So it's on page 407 that I'm suggesting that you put your hymnals down. It's, we're going to sit at the welcome table, and then it repeats itself a lot. And the second verse is all kinds of people around that. And the third verse is no fancy style. Don't worry, I'll tell you what the words are just before they come. So please rise in body or spirit and lay your hymnals down.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. I think that there is often a tendency for us as a white community, as white individuals, to hear these stories of our history, and we're horrified, and I would never, ever do that. And maybe that's so. But whether we would have participated or not, every single one of us benefits from that racism. Every single one of us has benefited from that. So I hope that we, as a community and as individuals, can use this information not just to reflect, not just to think, but to be moved to action, to understand that our responsibility as people who hold that privilege is to do everything we can to break down the barriers and remove that privilege, to pass that privilege around, with the hope that one day we won't even refer to that as privilege. We would simply refer to it as the right of humans everywhere. So I do want to leave that challenge with you today as we move forward. And it's not the first time that we've been given this challenge, but I think it's good that we be reminded that this is our job, this is our work. So after the postlude, and as we leave this space that's made sacred by our shared intentions, I do want to invite everybody to go downstairs for our potluck that we have the first Sunday. And I would like to challenge you to continue this conversation, to speak with one another, to work out real, actionable ways that we can do better.
I'm straying from hosting the program because we do like to make this much longer than just small.
now's the time in our service where we invite anyone who might be visiting to introduce yourself.